Between May 3rd and May 11 in 1997, much of the world was riveted to radios and television sets by a chess match between the world's greatest chess player, Garry Kasparov, and an IBM computer named Deep Blue. Kasparov had been victorious a year earlier, but now Deep Blue had the benefit of upgrades presided over by top grandmasters. Before this rematch, Kasparov spoke confidently about the inability of a computer ever to defeat a world-class chess player. Indeed, after Kasparov won the first game of the rematch, his estimation of the weakness of computers seemed to be vindicated. But there would be a total of 6 games, 3 of them ending in a draw, and Deep Blue winning 2 of the other 3. It was after the second draw that Kasparov admitted he was beginning to feel fear. In the end, Deep Blue delivered a humiliating defeat in the final game. Kasparov refused offers for another rematch, and Deep Blue was retired by IBM. Years later, in 2003, Kasparov again agreed to a match, this time with a computer named Deep Jr., but he achieved no more than a tie. Now, there's no question but that the approach to the game of chess by Kasparov, indeed by any human being, must be quite different from the approach programmed into Deep Blue. The computer in this match had the capacity to process 200 million chess positions per second. Estimates of Kasparov's abilities in this regard suggest that he was able to process perhaps 3 or 4 such positions per second. Deep Blue had stored thousands of games played by grandmasters over a course of many years. These results could be accessed by the computer with lightning speed. At 2,800 pounds and equipped with 516 chess processors, Deep Blue had the capacity to assess 50 billion board positions every 3 minutes. Any human being would be under a severe handicap facing computational power of this magnitude. Nor is a computer subject to distraction, fatigue, stress, or emotion, though some were inclined to describe Deep Blue's performance in psychological terms. Writing in the New York Times, the newspaper of record, the day after Kasparov's defeat, Robert McFadden seemed eager to give the machine a personality. He put it this way, quote, "It would be wrong, of course, to imagine that Deep Blue has no personality. Throughout its 6-game match with Kasparov over the last 10 days, indeed for most of its 4-year existence, it has exhibited qualities of scrupulous care, unshakable calm, and remarkable powers of concentration and endurance," close quote. Well, apart from the question of the extent of fear, distraction, frustration, etc., as these things might influence the outcome of the game, such factors surely make it clear that whatever the computer is doing is different from what a human chess player is doing. Is it different in the sense of being superior, or in the sense of being just different? Now, a small pocket adding machine can outdo any human being in the speed and accuracy of arithmetic calculations. A power drill can drill holes faster. An automobile can move more quickly than a sprinter. All in all, then, it should come as no surprise that a machine outperforms a human being. This, after all, is why we make machines in the first place. So viewed in this light, we might ask just what it was about the Deep Blue Kasparov match that seemed so different and so riveted the world's attention. Well, unlike drilling holes or even putting numbers in our heads, playing chess strikes many as the quintessential activity of an intelligent being. And if that's the case, then Deep Blue offers an example of a machine outsmarting a human being. Well, if only to be argumentative, I would note that a roadmap is something of an intellectual achievement. It records a very large number of locations. It lays out the shortest path along which to get from one location to another. But we don't attribute intelligence to a roadmap because we regard it as nothing more than the printed version of something human beings have done. It's surely not the roadmap that figured out the locations and the various routes. No one, however, was the deep blue that figured out the millions of board positions evaluated in less than a second. The information available in Deep Blue was put there. The very circuitry with which this information could be processed and integrated was also designed by human beings, and for that express purpose. Now, considered in this light, Deep Blue is reminiscent of a chess-playing machine that made the rounds as early as the 18th century. It astonished all onlookers until it was discovered that a chess-playing midget was inside. Well, let us turn the tables here. Garry Kasparov was not born knowing all the chess moves that would come to make him a grand master. And he too is obviously the beneficiary of some very special circuitry. One might say that he's the beneficiary of a very special brain, giving him uncommon powers of memory and decision-making. If these gifts qualify him as an intelligent being, why would we deny Deep Blue the same status? In order to appreciate the burden of this question, let me discuss a path-breaking article published in 1950 by one of the fathers of artificial intelligence, Alan Turing. The title of the article was Computing Machinery and Intelligence, and it appeared in the journal Mind. Here's how Turing sets up the question and proceeds to answer it. Quote, I propose to consider the question, can machines think? I shall replace the question by another, which is closely related to it, and is expressed in relatively unambiguous words. The new form of the problem can be described in terms of a game, which we call the imitation game. It is played with three people, a man, A, a woman, B, and an interrogator, C, who may be of either sex. The interrogator stays in a room apart in front of the other two. The object of the game for the interrogator is to determine which of the other two is the man and which is the woman. Close quote. Having set up the imitation game in this fashion, Turing goes on to claim that if, in the end, the interrogator is satisfied that he has been dealing with two human beings, all this based on answers to specific questions, then it should make no difference in the end if one of the respondents turns out to be a computing machine. A machine capable of deceiving the interrogator is accomplishing something that we would all assume required thinking. With stunning prescience, Turing makes this claim, quote, I believe that at the end of the century, the use of words and general educated opinion will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted, close quote. Alan Turing not only would have expected Deep Blue to perform as it did, but he laid the very foundations for that very performance. Why not consider Deep Blue as a participant in Turing's imitation game? Think of each of Kasparov's moves as a question. What do you plan to do next? And think of each of Deep Blue's moves as an answer to that question. This is an approximation to Turing's imitation game. And in light of the machine's performance, are we not, quote, able to speak of machines thinking without expecting to be contradicted, close quote. As it happens, however, Turing was contradicted in his own time. He cites a passage from a Professor Jefferson, designed to raise the gravest doubts about machines having any intellectual qualities whatever. According to Professor Jefferson, quote, not until a machine can write a sonnet or compose a concerto because of thoughts and emotions felt, and not by the chance fall of symbols, could we agree that machine equals brain, that is, not only write it, but know that it had written it. No mechanism could feel, and not merely artificially signal, an easy contrivance, pleasure at its successes, grief when its valves fuse, be warmed by flattery, be made miserable by its mistakes, be charmed by sex, be angry or depressed when it cannot get what it wants, close quote. Turing refers to this objection as, quote, the argument from consciousness, close quote. We cannot impute intelligence to a machine unless it is conscious of its own achievements. But, says Turing, quote, according to the most extreme form of this view, the only way by which one could be sure that machine thinks is to be the machine and to feel oneself thinking. One could then describe these feelings to the world, but of course no one would be justified in taking any notice. Likewise, according to this view, the only way to know that a man thinks is to be that particular man. It is in fact the solipsist point of view, close quote. We see here that Alan Turing is tracking the problem of other minds, as we discussed it in an earlier lecture, and seems to be taking the common sense position. When something behaves and judges as we do, we assume it does so with the same psychological resources we need to do the same. If it were necessary to have direct knowledge of the consciousness attending the actions, then we'd only be able to vouch for ourselves as having minds. This, says Turing, just as the solipsist point of view. Now, we've already seen Thomas Reid's solution to the problem of other minds. It's based on the fact that we live lives very similar to those lived by other entities who look like us and act like us and speak the way we do. The devices Alan Turing has in mind do not share these properties. What they do accomplish, however, in a manner that may seem similar to our own accomplishments, is follow established procedures and provide correct answers. Now, the philosopher John Searle, in his famous analogy called the Chinese room, offers a devastating critique of this entire perspective. There are many variations of the Chinese room, and I'll content myself here with a brief one. We agree to participate in an experiment. We are given a sheet on which are written certain instructions. These have to do with the manner in which we are to arrange certain cards that we're given once we enter the room. We are told to place cards with certain characters on them to the left or right of cards with other characters on them. Now, as it happens, the characters are Chinese ideograms. We have no knowledge of the Chinese language. Nonetheless, we follow the instructions, and we arrange cards in a sequence determined by these very instructions. The completed set makes absolutely no sense to us at all. However, to those who know the Chinese language, the sequence makes entire sense, and it can be read competently by anyone knowing the Chinese language. Now, what Searle seeks to establish with examples of this kind is the manner in which a seemingly mental achievement is gained by a process in which there is no comprehension whatever. The sheet of instructions tells us only how to move objects around. We have no idea of the meaning of this sequence, or even if there is a meaning. We are functioning the way a computer's compiler program might function. With great speed and immense capacity, Deep Blue, on this account, is arguably doing the same thing, which is to say, nothing akin to playing chess. Now, there have been many rejoinders to Searle and his conclusions about the in-principle limitations of artificial intelligence as a model of human cognition. What Searle hoped to establish by way of the Chinese room was the irrelevance of computational power to the distinct question of consciousness and intelligent behavior. To accept the Chinese room as establishing this much is to accept that, in principle, the achievements in the field of artificial intelligence would leave untouched all the interesting questions about consciousness and understanding. I offer the Chinese room, however, just to make clear that the success of Deep Blue is subject to more than one interpretation. Now, we find further critical appraisals by way of Thomas Nagel's question, cited in the earlier lecture. What is it like to be a bat? The point of the question is that to be like something is to be the subject of some experience. It would make no sense what it is like to be a clump of mud. By the same token, it might be argued that it makes no sense what it is like to be a printed circuit, or a million integrated printed circuits. What it is like to be a chess player is, among other considerations, to be in a state of focused attention, thinking of possible gambits. A 2,800-pound block of hardware on this account is not like being anything, especially a thinking thing. What is it like to be Deep Blue? Well, unless there's some shared experience, some overlap in the form of life lived by us and by Deep Blue, we're left to conclude that it's not like anything to be Deep Blue. Kasparov came to know fear in the rematch with Deep Blue. Presumably, he also experienced frustration and fatigue, anxiety and elation, confusion and confidence. There's no basis upon which to impute any of this to Deep Blue. It is not solipsism to deny consciousness to matter, as long as we grant it to those who are like ourselves. If we ask what is it like to be Garry Kasparov, we have answers, no matter how incomplete or subject to error. It's like being an entity that endures fatigue and worry, that takes pleasure in success, that feels uncertainty in the face of certain options. It's also like being an entity that thinks. Now, we can carry this empathic process elsewhere and realistically ask what it's like to be a dog or a cat or, yes, a bat. But as the circumstances of life become radically different from our own, and as the perceptual and behavioral capacities take on a radically different character, we soon lose touch. We can't even guess what it's like to be a clam or an amoeba, even though we're inclined to think that whatever has any kind of experience is something that it is like to be. Again, however, it is not like anything to be a machine. And if this is so, then, with all due respect to Alan Turing, whatever Deep Blue is doing, it surely isn't thinking. Well, if not thinking, just what is the computer doing? Is it actually playing a game? Now, before attempting to answer this question, it's necessary to establish just what it is that makes any activity a game. Consider these games: chess, basketball, football, marbles, hangman, water polo, solitaire, pin the tail on the donkey. Consider two children playing house where one is pouring tea into miniature cups. Now look, not all of these activities result in victory and defeat. Not all such activities result in scores or points. There are literally thousands of games, and none of them is an exact duplicate of any other. Any attempt, therefore, to provide an exhaustive definition of a game would be doomed to fail. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, recognizing this, and he understood that it's in the nature of games that they are recognized for what they are only by certain persons and under certain conditions. To use his own way of phrasing the matter, I would say that an activity is recognized as a game only by those living at least roughly the same form of life. Now, there isn't some structural or physical feature of an activity such that anyone capable of seeing that feature would understand that the activity is a game. Take the game of solitaire or patience, for example. One might actually go through an entire deck multiple times without actually completing the set. A person unfamiliar with card games watching someone placing cards over each other repeatedly, seemingly without rhyme or reason, would have no basis upon which to assume that a game was being played at all. Or consider the difference between a street fight and a boxing match. The latter is recognized for what it is only by those understanding various conventions, instructed within a given culture, and having a developed conception of what constitutes a match. Understood in these terms, an activity qualifies as a game insofar as it expresses certain cultural forms and norms. Games are not only cultural artifacts, but are used as cultural artifacts only by those who comprehend the nature of the game. Now, think of an alien who has no comprehension of the game of chess, and he proceeds to use the chessboard as a placemat. Yet the alien is using the chessboard, but not as a chessboard. Suppose Deep Blue consistently moved the bishop vertically and horizontally. Suppose further that Deep Blue persistently moved the rook diagonally. We would not say that the computer was playing chess poorly, but that it wasn't playing chess at all. It's necessary that the rules of chess be followed if we can say chess is being played. And the matter of following a rule is actually quite complicated, and on a certain understanding presupposes nothing less than a form of acculturation. The distinction I wish to make here is between the actual physical constraints that guarantee a given course of action and following a rule. Suppose we enter a restaurant and we see a sign on each table that reads, "No smoking." We proceed to find a cigarette, and without putting it to our lips, begin to burn its tobacco leaves with a match. Although smoke is emanating from the cigarette, we are not smoking. Of course, management will quickly draw our attention to the fact that we're violating the rule against smoking. Suppose instead that the habitual smoker, knowing he would not be able to smoke inside the restaurant, were to deeply inhale smoke before entering the restaurant, and then, once inside, exhaling all at once. And suppose he continues this practice, a puff at a time, each time leaving the restaurant in order to inhale, then returning into the dining room to exhale. At no time is he actually smoking in the dining room. But clearly, however, he's violating the rule. Now, how does one come to know that one is violating a rule? The example of smoking should make it clear that just about any rule is subject to a very wide range of applications and interpretations. Moreover, a given rule, if it's to be understood and obeyed, will apply across a virtually limitless number of instances, such that no one could possibly have all of them in mind in advance. We walk to a door in a hotel and we see a sign that says, "Do not disturb." Consider the linguistic and cultural resources one must have in order to know the ways in which others might be disturbed. In his philosophical investigations, Wittgenstein cuts a path toward a fuller comprehension of rule following when he says, quote, "A person goes by a signpost only insofar as there exists a regular use of signposts, a custom," close quote. We bring our automobile to a full stop when we approach a red octagonal sign at an intersection. During the time from early morning to the dead of night, when we might approach such signs, their actual hue and brightness will vary greatly. Depending on our approach, the actual shape of the sign as projected on the surface of the retina will be anything but octagonal. The sign may be in disrepair. It might not be standing straight. It might actually be part of a billboard advertisement and thus not require us to stop. Again, rule following is not a mechanical affair, but a cultural expression, not unlike wearing a feathered headdress or putting numbers on a mailbox. The Jones family live at 200 Spruce Street, next to the Smith family, who are at 202 Spruce Street. An alien who understands these numbers to be quantities might wonder if there's an invisible house at 201, or if items intended for both families should be addressed to the sum 402. Do computers play chess? Well, we might now ask, do computers follow the rules of chess? Recognizing that rule following is not as simple as we might initially have thought, we have reason to hesitate here. On a certain account, there must be a veritable culture of rule following. What I mean by this, following Wittgenstein, is that rule following is not unlike dressing, dining, gardening. It's something one is born into. The number of ways the activity can be engaged in is largely without limit. No one would live long enough to learn each instance of the activity. In point of fact, it really isn't something learned at all, if by learning we mean memorizing words in an instruction manual. After all, the instruction manual is going to contain phrases such as do not smoke, do not disturb, do not move the rook diagonally. In each of these cases, there are myriad ways in which the rule might be obeyed or violated. Those who follow the rules are those who get what? Those who get the gist of the rules. At the same place in his philosophical investigations, Wittgenstein says, quote, "Let me ask this. What has the expression of a rule, say a signpost, got to do with my action? What sort of connection is there here? Well, perhaps this one. I have been trained to react to this sign in a particular way, and now I do so react to it," close quote. No one enters the world disposed to come to a halt in the presence of an octagonal sign. And a baby given a chess piece is as likely to suck on it as to throw it out of the crib. Just what is the connection between a signpost and what one does? It certainly isn't causal. There isn't some built-in connection between the projection of octagonal forms on the retina and the resulting activation of muscles, such that one comes to a full stop. Rather, the nature of the connection is the same as that which has the disappointed batsman sit down after swinging 3 times without hitting the ball. It is not a causal connection, but a conventional one, and is thus comprehended, if it is to be obeyed, it is comprehended at a cognitive level, at a cultural level. Now let me make this clearer. Suppose our alien is also addicted to smoking, but comes from a distant planet with a different system of signs and rules. On that distant planet, anytime one sees a word with the letters S and K, it is obligatory to put out one's cigarette, this tied in with certain religious doctrines. The alien now enters one of our restaurants and sees the sign, "No smoking," and immediately crushes his lit cigarette. He has, I think you will agree, not followed the no smoking rule. He has followed a different rule. Note that the same behavior might be elicited by a sign, but might be governed by entirely different comprehended meanings. I would be strongly disinclined to think that computers get the gist of the rules of chess. I would be strongly disinclined to think that computers get the gist of any rule at all. My disinclination here is not that of the humanist whose sensibilities are offended by the very thought of machines being intelligent. Deep Blue was programmed in such a way as to have its chess pieces move according to the rules of chess. Those responsible for the programming are the rule followers. Among the things that it is like to be like them, following rules is one of them. Of course, this is also one of the things that it is like to be a chess player. Do computers play chess? Well, only if they try. To this point, we've considered normal conscious life. In the next lecture, I'll add to our difficulties by presenting certain significant departures from the norm and noting the special and additional problems that these create. So you see, things are always rather more complex than we might have thought in the first place.